Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian he never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach out and steal the election.
Macedonian Old New Year is still to come in a few days, meaning apparently the 2020 is continuing. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of Vodno Mountain in Skopje, the Republic of Macedonia.
And this is Cvetin and Jason calling in like a few blocks away from Jason.
I think you're a few over here kilometers away from me.
Yeah, a few kilometers.
Yeah, this is an unusual podcast, episode 98 of the Macedonian Content Farmers podcast that we're recording on Sunday, January 10, 2021, from literally the same city, the same country, but across town.
We are mindful of social distancing.
We are absolutely mindful of social distancing, whether it is 2 meters in some places, 6 feet in other places, 1 meter in Vienna, apparently, or in other places that I've seen, 1.5 meters. I have no idea which one it is. So we're practicing very safe social distancing by being at least 6 kilometers apart.
Yeah, and it's cold outside besides.
It's cold, it's raining, it's Sunday. This is probably the better way to do it. We'll get together later this week for a beer or a mastika or raki or something like that. But in the meantime, as I mentioned in the one-sentence opening, which is a record for the Macedonian Content Farmers podcast, that 2020 is apparently continuing. It will not end. It's like Frankenstein's monster. You just can't kill it, apparently. But as I mentioned also, Macedonian Old New Year is, is it the 13th or the 14th? I can't remember.
13th toward the 14th. 13th is
right, yeah.
Old
13th
New
is New Year's Eve, 14th, yeah. So, but you know what? At the rate we're going, it ain't going to end.
Yeah, let's take it one day at a time. Don't plan that far ahead.
Indeed. And so, just so you know, I have this lovely glass of new Vranets in my hand. So it's this year's harvest, or actually I should say last year's harvest, 2020. And so I guess in the French have the Beaujolais, which is the new harvest. This one was just harvested last fall, or late summer, I suppose. And it was obviously fermented, but not barrel-aged for very long, if at all. And it's lovely, I have to tell you. It's just lovely. It's from Domažna, of course, somewhere near Kavadarci. But it is the essence of Macedonia.
Yeah, home-brewed wine. I'm also being very fancy. I had coffee and I ran out of creamer, and so I got what I hoped was going to be a milky coffee to add to my coffee and use as creamer, and then turned out that the coffee I got was twice as strong as concentrated, so I ended up having to add just milk into the whole thing, and I don't know what I was drinking.
Okay, well, again, a very Macedonian habit, I should say, to have coffee late in the afternoon, evening. You know, as we've talked about, I can't drink coffee after, say, 2 in the afternoon, otherwise it'll keep me up all night. But I've got friends here that can drink Turkish coffee at midnight and immediately go to sleep. So
that would be too much for me.
Yeah, they're blessed in that respect. I'm not. But anyway, we're not here to talk about wine or coffee or the weather or anything like that. We're here to talk about the continuing fecal festival, to use a term that Jonah Goldberg uses when he wants to avoid swearing. The fecal festival that is 2020, continuing into 2021. And let's just start with the events that happened in my country, the United States of America, last week on Wednesday, January 6th, January 6th, a day before Macedonian Orthodox Christmas, January 7. The Electoral College vote was supposed to be counted in the House of Representatives on the Capitol building. It started to go forward as is constitutionally mandated. You had a group of folks outside, MAGA supporters, Trump supporters, American patriots of all types, sizes, stripes, etc. And it, got a little bit out of hand. Now, the violence that occurred in the Capitol obviously is wrong. You got to condemn violence. If we're going to sit here and condemn Black Lives Matter and Antifa that have been rioting throughout, rampaging throughout, destroying throughout America for the past 10 months, which they have been doing and burning American cities. People have been killed, police officers have been killed, hurt, etc. Businesses have lost their livelihoods, in addition to all the COVID stuff. But because of Antifa and Black Lives Matter and the far left, we condemn that. If we're going to condemn that, we have to condemn the violence that actually occurred in the Capitol on the 6th. But I think it's important to make a distinction between a lot of people were just there to protest. Perhaps they got out of hand, they went inside, perhaps they thought the doors were open for whatever reason, I don't know. But I think most of the folks inside the Capitol and outside the Capitol were just exercising their First Amendment rights and protesting what they saw as a fraudulent election. Now, that's a very distilled summary of what happened last week, but what I think we want to get into, because I've seen it a lot on Twitter and whatnot, and I've been traveling. I've been the past couple of days. Frankly, we had Christmas, which I wasn't paying a lot of attention to what was going on. I know you were watching it, etc. And then I went down to a little village in Mavrovo, Leonovo, and visit friends, and then Bitula, and said, so you know what, I'm here to see friends and family. And all this stuff, I try not to pay attention to.
And to build up an alibi.
Exactly. Plausible deniability. So I was out and whatnot, so I wasn't paying too much attention. Anyway, that's my very short summary of what happened. As I got back on social media today and whatnot, I think there's a lot of similarities that people were pointing out between what happened here in 2017, what happened in the U.S. We're going to talk about that shortly. We're also going to talk about things I think that are, a 50,000 foot, 50,000 feet, 30,000 feet, 10,000 meter, that's easier to do in my head, perspective on issues of free speech and YouTube and Twitter banning President Donald Trump, and then things like Google and Apple Play and these other the tech giants banning, suspending Parler, which is the alternative to Twitter, etc. All of those things we're going to talk about, and how those actions will have ramifications. And to use a Rumsfeldian quote, there are known unknowns. We don't, or unknown knowns, one of the two. Something's going to happen. I don't know what, but it's going to be bad for everybody.
Yeah.
But let's start with the events of January the 6th in Washington, D.C. I think you watched a lot of that, correct?
I gave up around 11 o'clock in the evening Macedonian time, so, practically when the crowd was still inside, and there was obviously going to be a police counterattack, because, a unique Macedonian perspective on this whole thing is that we've seen this before, we know how it ends. The guys got suckered into storming the parliament, just as Vemera got suckered into storming the parliament in 2017 during the vote on, when Zaev's government began being put in place. And immediately, I realized that by the morning, Trump is going to be forced to back off and, denounce the protesters, just as Gruevski was forced to do this in the evening on April 27th, 2017, when the Macedonian parliament was stormed. I realized that this is going to be used by the left to declare all people on the right as violent, aggressive, abandoning, violating democratic norms. Even though, as you said in your case, Black Lives Matter and the left were rampaging through the country with much greater death toll and damage, cumulative damage, intimidating opponents for years, for months at least, and then, even before that, since Trump was inaugurated. And in Macedonia's case, even though the so-called colored revolution was rampaging through the country for 2 years before the parliament storming. But they write the narrative. In our case, it was the U.S. Embassy, the U.S. State Department, and the EU Embassy declaring the winner of the vote in the parliament, which was completely irregular and etc. In the evening, in your case, I was cracking jokes that there is no U.S. Embassy in Washington, so there is nobody to declare Biden as president. But we got close enough by quickly convening the Congress again and having people like Boris Johnson and Sebastian Kurz. This first line of denouncers of the protest were the right-wing European politicians who were kind of like Trumpian personalities, but completely subverted in the meantime. And they were the first to say we had Bulgarian foreign minister. We had very minor countries in Europe declaring Biden the president, asking for an orderly transition of power in a completely coordinated move, and with the same wording, which was really, very funny to see this being done.
They got the memo.
Yeah, usually it's the U.S. issuing these orders to other countries. Now it was the other way around. And Trump caved. Now, we begin the splintering of the right. There is going to be like we have here, somebody takes over the GOP, but, Trump is still best positioned to do this. And I'm just seeing now that he's going to Texas, to Alamo, probably, maybe to declare secession or nominally to oppose the opening of the borders under Biden, which is being announced. So, he's still best positioned to take the party over. So there's going to be a CAC faction in the GOP as well, and this is going to splinter the right vote in the coming, elections. Just like the left here is abusing the staged incident in 2017 to try to splinter the right and to, demonize anybody on the right as violent, hater of Albanians, against democratic norms, against orderly transition of government. So I watched it. I realized this was just the prequel to the that Macedonia was a prequel to what we are seeing now in the U.S., like a trial run maybe.
Staging ground or
trial run, I suppose. And
trial run's a better word.
Just see who benefits from what happens. And I said, okay, I'm not going to watch this till the end, and I turned it off. And everything has been quickly developing like it has been here.
Probably better for you to do that and get a good night's sleep. As I said, I wasn't really paying attention. I read the headlines and things like that, and then I sit and think about it. I haven't posted on Facebook since Christmas Day. It's because I need some time. I don't need some time. I want some time to think about it.
And you should post until you have that. You can before we're all
before I'm banned. Yeah. Well, okay. Two things. First of all, on the splintering of parties and whatnot. Obviously, that happens in every country and in our modern times in the West and small d democratic countries, etc. It's going to happen, frankly, in the United States now. Setting aside, all we've just talked about, going forward, a President Biden and soon-to-be President Kamala Harris, after Biden is deposed by Kamala Harris and her team and others, etc., which will happen within the first 2 years. Kamala Harris will be the first female president of the United States of America. That will happen. It will happen within 2 years. I will make a bet with anybody on that. My standard bet is $1 US. Right to, no, never mind. That's going to happen. But the left within the Democrat Party, and again, I never say Democratic because they're not, within the Democrat Party is going to be splintered itself as we go forward. And of course, on January 5, we had the two special runoff elections in Georgia. A little bit surprised on my part, I admit, that the Democrats got both seats. So, and it's kind of weird because we're in this transition period right this very moment between now and January 20. So Trump is president. Pence is vice president. The Senate right now is gosh, it's 50-50
Yeah.
with with the new Senate, but because Pence is still the vice president and president of the Senate, if any legislation came up between now and then, he would have the deciding vote, which is a very odd thing. America isn't in this situation very often. But going forward beyond January 20, when the Democrats control the presidency, the House, and the Senate, we know that they're going to have, because they've already had, vocally and loudly and vociferously, debates in private and in public between the more centrist wing of the party and the far left, represented by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I would throw in Kamala Harris with that. So they're going to have their own splintering, et cetera, going forward, which in a way is good for the right, for conservatives, for the Republican Party. Because as we've talked about many times in this podcast, the revolution always eats its own. The revolution always devours itself, and that's exactly what's going to happen there. I still believe overall the trajectory of the United States is division and decline. I also believe that about the West in general, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But there's always going to be periods where there's a little bit of hope. I mean, 2016 was that, both for the United States and for the United Kingdom, where they voted for Brexit, and finally under Boris Johnson achieved that. So, our friends on the left like to say that history is unidirectional. There's only the right side of history, and we're on it, and nothing else can happen, etc. But that's not true. Things can change. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Gosh, I don't know where I was going with this. I started off on something, and it's easy to get distracted these days on these things. But let me just take a step back and talk about something I've been talking about with my friends here in Macedonia as I go around and talk to folks, and that is this general belief, and I think we talked about it last week on the podcast. I can't remember because time is fuzzy right now for me. This idea that the West, liberal democracy, small l, small d, is going to continue. As Jonah Goldberg says in his book, Suicide of the West, this whole idea of the West is a miracle to begin with. This idea that we have small d democracy and capitalism combined only arose about 400 years ago in this little area in Northern Europe called the United Kingdom and the Netherlands, and then it expanded out from there, etc. But it was an accident then, and it's a miracle that it's continued, and now it's in decline. And I truly believe that is what is going to happen. The West is doomed. Slavery and bondage are much easier than freedom. Freedom takes a lot of hard work. People aren't interested in hard work. People are interested in slavery, bondage, although they don't quite see it that way. And so they're willing to give up their freedoms for a little bit of capitalism, for shiny trinkets and things like that. And I see that as what is happening in the U.S. I see that's what's happening in Macedonia. I see that's what's happening throughout the West. I don't know how to reverse that. What say you?
I mean, you had some idea of reversing it. We had some idea here. I mean, okay, to be fair, Trump was never really in power, and that's why all this protesting seemed so impotent, and the storming of the parliament. All his advisors would denounce him long, even while he was still in the midst of his term, or even in the early stages, etc. Here, Gruevski was actually in power for a long time. And the approach was very clear. You try to revitalize the economy of the country. Trump did some of it. You have a much greater base and much greater dynamism to begin with, incomparably, and much greater work ethic. Here, it had to be built from the scratch, which Gruevski to some extent did, tying up working class people around factories, around production, trying to bring back some hope in honest days work, all this boring stuff, which is actually so essential.
Which takes hard work.
Yeah, and well, it's not as fancy as planting marijuana and everybody becoming rich overnight like Zaev promises, but right. It was boring, mundane, and it's also beautiful and extremely important. What we were doing, what you were trying to remember how you used to do it until recently, and trying to revive it. Um, and then you obviously take some reasonable amount of pride in your country and your past accomplishments in your culture, and define it as in opposition to some of to the neighboring countries, especially when they're in your hair, like it's in our case. It's not like a completely open definition, but you need to have some kind of a basis for defining unity in the country, national, religious, cultural grounds. Both Macedonia under Gruevski and the U.S. under Trump are doing this to varying degrees of success and sometimes with too comical effect, but still, it's also very, very important to have. We'll see soon. Now that we don't have it, we see it in Macedonia now that we're not doing this, and soon we'll see in the U.S. once turbocharged efforts to stop even discussing having a common heritage legacy, completely denouncing what was until recently the common heritage of the country. What happens once you start doing this in full force and in broad daylight? Declaring the founders as racists and the Constitution as racist, and your entire economic success is built on racism and just hating your own country. Maybe that was the main revolutionary thing we had here and there. Not hating your own country for a while, and now we haven't had it for a few years, and we see the results. Even the worst detractors of Macedonian nationalism, as they called it, are now saying, okay, maybe a little bit of patriotism, let's call it, is important, because otherwise this country is going to be split between Albania and Bulgaria. Very soon we're going to have a war on our hands. So, even every few months the US or the British embassy will tweet something like Macedonian language. We speak it, we hablo Macedonian, just to like prop up Zaev, maybe even without try to save him from being fully humiliated, or these feckless people in Brussels say no to the Bulgarians because they realize this place will collapse if we don't have this. And in your case, there will be nobody who will, especially now you're just at the start of the downward slope. There will be nobody to tap on the brakes. I mean, this is going to be, throwing out the Pledge of Allegiance, singing the Black National Anthem before the.
And what's it called? I forgot the name.
Lift Every Voice.
Whatever.
Lift Every Voice and Sing, I think. It was performed, we discussed this, by the U.S. Embassy in Macedonia during the 4th of July. They didn't say the Black National Anthem, but they had it in the program. It was obligatory part of the program.
It is a parallel society, which,
Yep.
of course, we see here. And you can't govern a society that is divided in two. So the United States, I mean, obviously, we sorry to interrupt you, but obviously we paid the ultimate price in the 1860s and fought a civil war in which hundreds of thousands of Americans died or were wounded, and etc. But we paid deeply in blood and treasure to reunify the country. However, 160 years later, so much has changed. It's very hard to make apples to apples comparison between those two time periods, and any civil strife, I'm choosing my words carefully here, any civil strife or civil conflict in a country of 330 million people in 2021 with the technology we have is going to look very different from what happened during the United States Civil War. And nobody knows what that's going to look like.
Yeah, I mean, there are, like here in Macedonia, there are clear parts of the country which belong to one side, parts of the country that clearly belong to the other. So we have, obviously, Albanian villages, towns.
Right.
It's clear that these are going to,
It's easy to see them because they have rockets in them. Sorry, minarets.
And then there are, fully Macedonian, but I mean proper Macedonian, like salt
Yeah.
of the earth people. Not that Albanians are not salt of the earth. I mean, they're
Right.
much to
They're
be,
hard workers. Yeah.
praised in their culture and etc. But we have a territorial dispute, obviously. We are vying for territory, and then there is also, of course, the parts of Skopje which are nominally Macedonian but dominated by the left, the
Right.
culture warriors, social justice warriors, whatever you call them, and then there are parts which are anywhere in between. And when things get ugly, at least in the Balkans, the 100% homogeneous parts do fine, but everything in between gets completely wrecked. Now, in the U.S., of course, there are cities which are completely gone to the blue side, so like minority, majority, and what of the majority remains there is leftist and globalist, etc., deracinated. Then there is
Good word.
Middle America, salt of the earth. Pickup trucks, guns, dogs, family, church, etc. And then there is suburbs, exurbs in between. It's very difficult, to map it out precisely. But if things begin to get ugly, these will be the contested areas, and this is where I would move out of. Soon, quickly. Like purple states, blue states will be fine, red states will be fine. The purple states are going to get crashed. Now, in the U.S., at least you have a lot of geography, so you can still, reposition yourselves. Like many are from California to Arizona and Texas. In Macedonia, obviously, we don't have that luxury. So when things start getting bad, they're going to be bad mostly everywhere.
Well, yeah, exactly. And as I know we talked about, I think last week of the podcast or probably before, the conversation that sticks in my head between oh bugger, Joe Rogan and Douglas Murray, the podcast, and Joe had just moved his family to Texas from California, and they were joking that at least when it all collapses, at least he'll have an extra 3 months to enjoy.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's nobody escapes alive. But maybe you can buy yourself, 3-6 months time, etc., depending on where you are. Maybe in some really mountainous village here in Macedonia, before it all ends. I want to go back and talk about the issue of free speech and what's just happened in the past 72, 96 hours with these platforms that primarily Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, that have banned the account of the President of the United States of America for at least through the inauguration, which is on January 20, perhaps longer, perhaps indefinitely. I don't know. And I'm, a podcast by nature is not polished, it's rough, etc. And we're just talking here as friends about things that interest us and things that are important. I am not a lawyer, not a constitutional lawyer. I don't know exactly how these things work in terms of the rule of law, etc. These are private corporations, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. You do sign an agreement. Nobody reads it. I didn't read it. Clicking on the box and agreeing to their rules and community standards, quote unquote. And so they have the right to ban you. We've all been banned. You've been banned, I think, from Twitter. I've been banned from Facebook. Oddly, I've been banned from Facebook for using the phrase stupid Americans, which was really quite harmless when you looked at it.
It's actually going to be mandatory to say it very soon.
Yeah. But they have that right as private corporations. I get that. The issue, I think, is that they are now seen as monopolies because they control so much. And they have deliberately used their strength and their power and their money to keep competition out of the market, to keep everybody else at bay. And when you have a monopoly like that, and competition can't come in, because competition is good. As conservatives, we believe in competition. When you use your power and your strength and your money and your influence in Washington and other capitals, because these are global corporations, then they're no longer necessarily, quote unquote, just private corporations. They are perhaps akin to public utilities. So at least in the United States, a public utility, electricity provider, a water provider, waste management, etc., these are regulated in the United States at the state level by the Corporation Commission usually. And so the Corporation Commission puts in rules and regulates what they can charge, regulates what they can do, etc. And I think that's probably the direction we're going. As I read through, the various social media posts which are still allowed, news articles, etc. Both the left and the right have reasons for disliking Facebook and Twitter and Google and Amazon Web Services, etc. I don't know, again, like I said earlier, how this is all going to play out. I do know, I'm pretty sure, that none of it, the outcomes aren't going to be good. And then you've got a company like Parler, to use the French, which is basically the antidote, the mirror opposite of Twitter. And again, I'm not a techie or anything like that, so but they host their service on Amazon Web Services, Amazon Web Cloud, I'm not sure what it's called. And when Amazon says it's no longer going to host them, when Google and Apple say they're no longer going to allow you to upload those apps or download those apps, again, I'm a Luddite, I'm not a techie, but basically when they restrict access to Parler, then those platforms are no longer available. So again, two things. Number one, it's not going to be bad, it's not going to be good, but also, I think, I could be wrong, the beauty of capitalism and the beauty of our small d democratic system is that this could perhaps create other opportunities for rivals to these very large corporations that we're talking about, like Amazon, like Google, etc. Now that would take time, but given Moore's law, in which technology, doubles every 6 months or something like that, these things could happen. They're probably already in the works and we don't even know about them. Anyway, I think the jury is out, so to speak, on all this, but it is fascinating to watch it, and the idea of cracking down on free speech because you find it objectionable, the idea of cracking down on free speech because you find it offensive, the idea of cracking down on free speech, banning free speech, etc., because you simply disagree with it, ultimately isn't going to work. I think you had a tweet earlier today about somebody from the communist Yugoslav times about the radio. What was that?
Milovan Djilas. I tried to find the exact quote, but I couldn't. I remember it from reading it way back. He was like a part of the communist Yugoslav party. He was one of Tito's main confidants and ideologues. Very smart guy, actually. But he quickly said, "Listen, what we are doing is crazy, and besides, it's not going to work." Because technically it's not going to work. He was impressed by seeing when the British would parachute like a handheld radio, and he quickly realized, okay, this is small, battery powered, I can talk to anybody in the world. Well, listen, we can't, he was part of building the propaganda apparatus in Yugoslavia, and he realized it depends on us controlling the source of the broadcasts, and it's impossible to do the way technology is going. So, we'll be on the losing side very quickly, and once people have small handheld devices to communicate to each other, this is all going to fail. And this was in the 50s when he had this revelation, and on top of many other things which he criticized the Yugoslav Communist Party about, and he was imprisoned. He was for a while a popular dissident in the West, etc. So he was one of the most prominent Communist Party dissidents in Yugoslavia, and now we see that the big tech and the U.S. government is going against, and the deep state government now, soon to be just the state government, going against this revelation Djilas had way back. I mean, people would accept, I suppose, some kind of limitations on Twitter and Facebook if it were at least even-handed in some way, but I don't think I've ever seen a comment this post is, the veracity of this post is doubtful, etc., except on a Trump tweet. I've never seen it used on anybody else. The Chinese were actually mocking everybody. They had this horrific comment about, how they're liberating the women of, the Muslim women of that western part of China by liberating them from their men, I suppose, taking them to the camps. And it was erased after a while, but then, the Chinese realized, okay, listen, they're not serious about this. So there were other Chinese government entities tweeting the same and even actually amplifying this. So I was like, okay, now they're just trying to show who's boss. I mean, this fact-checking obviously exists just for Trump and Trumpkins, nobody else.
Sure.
And there was this other situation when the New York Post published a very serious, credible allegations of how Biden's son made his millions. Which we know all about here in Macedonia at a much lower degree, how the State Department and politicians in DC were making money and abusing the judiciary here. You can just imagine what they were doing in Ukraine. And then they banned the New York Post.
Right. For 2 weeks.
In the run-up to the election, yeah. So this is obviously one-way traffic, and
A New York Post. We won't fact check it right now, but I think the New York Post was founded by Thomas Jefferson.
No, Hamilton.
And Hamilton. Sorry, that's right.
You should have watched. I told you to watch the musical.
I hate musicals.
It's a good source
I
of
hate
memes
musicals.
now.
So, yeah.
No, I keep
Hamilton,
using it
that's
for
right.
memes. Yeah.
Out of Hamilton, the short-tempered protean creator of the Coast Guard, founder of the New York Post, ardently abused his cabinet post, destroy his reputation. Welcome, folks, to the Adams administration.
And we have, this hyper-partisan group here, Metamorphosis Vistinomer. They are now fact-checking Facebook, and they're putting obviously ridiculous fact checks on Facebook comments, to the point I was scaring everybody on Parler yesterday. Made like a video, like a photo edit, which will probably be fact checked by Vistinomer soon, that they set up a Parler account and they're now following everybody on Parler and gonna check our Parles now after
What is
verifying
and for the benefit of our listeners, what is your handle on Parler?
The same, Cvetin. I'm the same on Gap. Even opened a Gap account, but that's a bit, I don't know.
Right.
If they burn down Parler, I guess I'm going there, or on Telegram, or it's the
Well,
same.
who knows? I mean, who knows? Again, going back to this issue of technology and innovation and capitalism and small d democracy, etc. Who knows what is going to be created next, and and how that's going to be controlled by the titans of tech, by the left, etc. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I don't think you can control it, though. I mean, we'll see. Unless you crack down at every single level, as China has done, the Great Chinese Firewall, as we talk about. But even then, even with that, information still gets through somehow. You can't completely control it.
I mean, they will be doing? I guess they realize that, okay, half of the U.S. does not even vote. Of the remaining half, it's split more or less evenly in half, GOP and them. I guess they realize, okay, it's enough for us to shame a portion of the right into look who you've been in bed with for so long, denounce. Like, they still demand that people denounce Gruevski here, and even though the response is like, sometimes they say, well, what you want? You want Gruevski back? And more and more the response is, yeah, sure. And they'll be doing this in the US. They will silence some of the vocals on the right, and they will allow others just to like a controlled opposition. We were even joking, there is a controlled opposition group here in Skopje, former Vemera people. Interestingly, people who were directly involved in the storming of the parliament, but since they were useful in the future to the US embassy and to Zaev, they were bought, they were co-opted, etc. This is why it was so funny when the US ambassador here tweeted 2 days, so the first day, the evening where the world leaders like Boris Johnson, etc., denouncing the riots. The second day were lesser countries like Zaev and Pendarovsky tweeted their denunciation of the attacks of the storming of the parliament on the second day. And the third day, it was the ambassadors.
Meaning the House and the Senate, Congress.
Sorry, what did he say?
You said Parliament.
Oh, sorry, excuse me.
Yeah.
And then the third day were the ambassadors pledging loyalty, fealty to the coming president. And she said, this is horrible. The storming of I think she used assault on the Capitol, on Congress. Yeah. And then, just post picture back at her of her meeting with members of parliament who literally opened the doors to the protesters. So there was selective pardon in Macedonia. People who participated, some were even incited or were drawn in by the crowd. They were sentenced to lengthy prison sentences, while people who were politically active and who were useful in the future, specifically to vote on the name change, like the 3 members of parliament from Vomero, they were pardoned, and then they became members of parliament in good standing with the U.S. Embassy. They met Philip Ricker, they met the U.S. ambassador here. So now, and they're now meeting in this hotel, which practically Sasha Myalkov built, the security chief during Vomero time, who was, if Vomero, to the extent Vomero was involved in the protests, and it was a pretty big extent, it's widely known, common knowledge, obviously. Let's not kid ourselves. It was Myalkov who was in charge. And now he's in good standing. He runs faction. He's trying to form a faction in Vomero. And we were joking, okay, there is the Trump Hotel in D.C., so now we can imagine they'll be going again after General Flynn or Attorney Barr or whoever could be seen as, Trump's son or whoever, and they will try to turn them over, control the GOP in the future by threats of charges of criminal prosecution. I was joking, Trump now owns the old post office building, the Trump Hotel in D.C., so this would be the D.C. Marriott. And, last episode we were talking, okay, we now expect the left to overreach, and then in 2022, GOP wins the House and the Senate back and blocks President Harris, etc. But not if you have a divided GOP. And if you have the Ted Cruz's and Hollies against, the Grahams and the McConnells and the FBI and CIA is crashing down on the opposition and selectively arresting some Trumpkins, releasing others, co-opting a third group, and one group is calling for boycott. You had this in Georgia, we have this in Macedonia, we had ostensibly Vomero people calling for boycotts of elections because, it's all rigged, what's the point of it anyway? So you'll have all of these things which were, Macedonia was obviously the deep state lab for many things in which we're now about to see in the US. And you can literally have, a messy GOP primary. Then one side says, okay, we are not voting for the candidate who won the primary because he's not fully Trumpkin or he's too much Trumpkin. So yeah, this is going to be a mess. They will just be splintering the opposition and try to run the country in full totalitarian fashion.
Yeah. Well, again, going back to what I talked about, Goldberg and the miracle and the West and et cetera. It's that's essentially the Francis Fukuyama's book in the 90s, The End of History, and The Last Man posited that small L, small d liberal democracy would triumph. That ain't going to happen. It's going to be the soft form or maybe hard form of totalitarianism that's going to take over. That most people will willingly accept to one degree or another. Others will be forced, and others will be killed into this form. And that won't be global. That'll be but that'll certainly be the West and the direction of the West. But in the meantime, it's going to be a hell of a ride as we go towards that glorious glorious end. I suppose we're contractually obligated, Cvetin, to talk about Bulgaria on this podcast. So
Again?
yes, I know. So it is just the beginning of the new year. Although, again, as I said, it's still 2020 continuing. Our good friend, the jolly, roly, rotund Karakachanov, defense minister of Bulgaria, has put forward, I think, a 12-point manifesto, protocol, agreement, whatever you want to call it, that he is demanding that Macedonia actually sign. And there's rumblings here in Macedonia that, or leaks or whatever you want to call it, that Zaev has already agreed to sign this. What news do you have on that?
I mean, Karakachanov didn't reveal the demands, but they're, pretty well known. He would probably ask us to accept that, Macedonians were Bulgarians until very recently. The Macedonian language was Bulgarian language. There was no Bulgarian occupation in World War II.
I think that
not
the
to use.
12th,
Yeah.
Sorry, I think the 12th one is bend over and squeal like a pig.
Not to use the Macedonian language in the EU will be a big one, and not to demand minority rights for Macedonians in Bulgaria, which we are not in any meaningful way, will be another. But, it's really a mute point. We're negotiating with Bulgaria while Zaev practically accepted all demands at the start.
Right.
He literally said all of the things Bulgaria wanted him to say in that beginner's interview, and then after that he has been reluctant to put this on paper. But it's not like he's reluctant for principled reasons. He's just biding his time, and there is really no sense in having any negotiations anymore. Once at the start you say you will accept all of your demands, it's just an even worsely acted show, kabuki theater than the protest and the storming of the capital. So Dimitrov said we want to put a break on the dispute with Bulgaria until their elections. He's like being resigned, doesn't tweet a lot. He's disappointed in his European partners for not cracking down on Bulgaria, like really childish stuff. Meanwhile, Zaev is sending former Prime Minister Buchkovsky to negotiate more. And they will vote in March. And Zaev is just waiting for an opportune moment to accept all their demands. He's already selling the big copper mine, which Gruevski initiated, and Zaev was going to ban on environmental reasons, but in fact was banning because he wanted to take it over. He wanted to shake down the owners. So he's now selling it to a businessman who is close to Borisov. So there is a lot of money changing hands, as well as literally accepting all of their demands, which really why many people some oppose Borisov in Brussels, oppose Borisov on political grounds. They don't like the fact that he's conservative and think that attacking him will help the left in Bulgaria. It doesn't, because Borisov turns out to be the tough guy standing up to Brussels liberals and leftists, which is a very good place to be in before elections. But some are actually, very modest attempts at propping up Macedonian identity against Bulgaria, because they realize, listen, we're going to have the first NATO country collapse on our hands even before the US if this thing continues.
Right. Yeah.
So it's going to. What can you say?
As you like to say, it's going to be glorious. So.
Yeah. I mean, that's the only honest way out. Like a complete defeat of their. In our case, the takeover is complete, and the only honest way out is defeating North Macedonia, the Nordonia project. But unfortunately, it's very difficult to defeat the project without inflicting a lot of damage to the country. But should this country survive in this form? I don't know. In your case, there is still a lot of salvageable real estate, which could function as a proper country on its own. Obviously, you cannot come to an agreement, an understanding with the blue states, the slivers of the coastal, the east and west coast, and the bits around the Great Lakes.
Right.
So how do you proceed? I mean, we don't have a divorce in our future. We have a complete Bosnia-style breakup. In your future, there could be a divorce, but
I think it's too intermingled. I think of my leftist liberal friends, not only in the Tucson area, but in the Phoenix area, which is the capital, and throughout Arizona, and we've only voted for 3 Democrats for president since I think 1948. So we're generally red. But again, to your point earlier, with all the Californians coming in, they sell their places in California, cash out, have a fortune, come in, buy something in Arizona, which is good for us, but bring their politics with them, and so slowly that turns the state. So I don't know. We will
but
see.
the good thing is they're going to insert themselves. They're going to stand in front of the freight train, which was the U.S. economy. I mean, always has been, and especially in the past 4 years. Now, if they're really serious about reparations, bankrupting everybody just to pay the debt of the spoiled college kids, ban fracking, ban oil and gas infrastructure development, they're going to get run over.
Right.
They're going to get steamrolled. I mean, in our case, it was still a growing economy. It was such a great engine of... nothing has been added to the economy since Zaev took over.
Right.
But, it was still the inertia of growth under Gruevski that, there's really no worsening of economic situation that would cause a reaction against Zaev. Even, this capital infrastructure, investments like the Ilovica mine are now advancing under new Zaev-imposed management. In your case, there is actually a lot to be lost. And not to mention, it's one thing to have an influx of Californians into your neighborhood. It's a completely different thing if they really go ahead with open borders. And plus a lot more guns. Lot more guns.
Yeah, gun sales.
In private hands.
Gun sales are through the roof. It's hard to find ammo right now. On that happy note, we're running along here. Probably in this podcast, episode 98, the Macedonian Content Farmers podcast. We'll see what next week brings.
Yep.
All right. Great talking to you,
Stay safe, everybody.
Yep. Wear your masks. Stay 2 meters, or 1.5 meters, or 1 meter, 6 feet, or something like that.
Just don't get close to each other.
Yeah, and be careful about the vaccine you take.
No.
Talk to you later.
You too, buddy. Take care.